My daughter framed me for embezzlement, watched me rot in prison while she took my empire and my name. 10 years later, I came back with a new face, a new identity. What happened next shocked everyone. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Janice in Fort Myers, Florida. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I used to believe that love was enough. That if I gave my daughter everything I never had, a warm home, a solid education, a seat at my table, she would grow into the kind of person who wouldn't betray me. I was wrong. My name is Richard Morgan. I founded and ran Morgan Tech, a consulting empire that made its fortune in biotech integrations for government labs and private healthcare firms. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I carved my name into the industry with 30 years of sweat and sleepless nights. When my wife died in a car accident, Olivia was only 9. From that day forward, everything I did, every contract, every expansion, every damn sacrifice, was for her. I used to say she was the best of both of us. Her mother's grace, my grit. Looking back now, I see the cracks I refused to name, even when they began to split wide open. Olivia never liked being second. If she came in third in a spelling bee, she wouldn't speak to me for days. I thought it was drive, determination, some legacy of my own ambition. But by high school, it twisted into something else. She hated when I missed her debates for board meetings, even if they paid for her travel, her private coaches, her ridiculous obsession with owning the room. Still, I brushed it off. I was proud of her. How could I not be? She was sharp as a whip, already shadowing our CFO by the time she hit college. I started grooming her early, thinking one day I'd hand her the empire, let her run with it. I taught her everything. How to sniff out a bad acquisition, how to reframe losses for the media, how to make someone believe they needed you more than they actually did. Turns out, she learned those lessons a little too well. The betrayal came in waves. First, the anonymous audit. I'd been too trusting, signing off on internal transfers, assuming the numbers made sense. Then the whispers, executive murmurs I ignored, brushing them off as jealousy of Olivia's growing influence. But nothing prepared me for that Monday morning knock on my office door. 2 agents. Federal. Charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, misuse of company funds. I thought it was a joke. I laughed in their faces, even as they snapped on the cuffs. The real punch came in the courtroom. When the prosecutor listed the documents they had, emails, signatures, approvals, I realized someone had forged them. Painfully precise. Right down to the way I dotted my I's. I knew who it was. But I still didn't believe it. Not until they called her to the stand. I don't remember what she wore that day, but I remember how calm she was. Perfect posture, polished voice. She told the court I'd been erratic in the last year, that I'd ignored internal warnings, that she begged me to step back, but I'd refused. The prosecutor painted her as the whistleblower, the brave daughter trying to save a corrupt father. Every word was a knife. Every glance toward me like watching a stranger hold my life in her palm and squeeze until it bled. She wouldn't look me in the eyes, not once. I searched her face for remorse, fear, anything. But Olivia? Olivia looked bored. I got 12 years. I served 10 on good behavior. And in those 10 years, she never visited. Never sent a letter. The company I built from nothing? She renamed it, Vire Holdings, 6 months into my sentence. Said in a Forbes interview that she had to rebuild the brand after a decade of fraud. She even changed her last name, just Olivia Vire now. A reinvention, they called it. A phoenix. What no one saw was the ash she left behind. Me. My legacy. My name. All gone. Sometimes, I would lie awake in that concrete box and try to remember the last time I hugged her. Really hugged her. I couldn't. Maybe it was when she got into Stanford. Or maybe before that. Maybe I stopped seeing her as my daughter and started seeing her as my successor, and maybe she resented me for it. But none of that justifies what she did. She didn't just take the company. She took everything. She rewrote history and buried me in a prison grave with my eyes still open. The guards called me Richie Rich. Some were cruel. Most were indifferent. I kept my head down, taught myself law, learned how shell companies worked, studied corporate structures until I could sketch a boardroom coup with a dull pencil and the back of a napkin. Because that's all I had left, my mind. My name was poison. My assets frozen. But my mind, that was mine, and I sharpened it every day with one singular goal, to get it all back. Not the company, not the money. Control. You have to understand, I never wanted revenge. Not at first. I wanted answers. I wanted to know how the little girl who used to cry when I traveled too much grew into the woman who could frame her father and sleep soundly at night. But 10 years has a way of boiling love down to something bitter. And by the time I walked out of that prison gate with nothing but a duffel bag and a broken name, I didn't want answers anymore. I wanted her to know what it felt like, to watch everything you built fall to pieces, to scream into a room and realize no one's listening. Just like I did. And so, I made a promise to myself that day. I would never speak my real name again. Richard Morgan was dead. In his place stood someone else, someone smarter, colder, and patient enough to wait until the very foundations of Olivia's world cracked beneath her heels. I didn't need justice. I needed her to feel it. Every single piece. And that was just the beginning. Prison doesn't break you all at once. It peels you back slowly, layer by layer, until there's nothing left but a raw nerve, pulsing with the memory of who you used to be. The first 6 months were the worst. I slept with one eye open, flinched at every shadow, and tried not to scream when the lights buzzed too loud overhead. I shared a bunk with a man who stabbed his brother over a pair of shoes. He used to snore like a dying engine. One night, I asked him how long he'd been in. He didn't answer, just laughed and said, "Long enough to stop counting." I wrote that down on a scrap of toilet paper and hid it in my shoe. Even then, I clung to anything that made me feel human. The worst part wasn't the concrete or the food or the cold. It was the silence. Olivia's silence. The world kept turning out there, and she let it. She didn't write, didn't call, didn't even send word through my lawyer. For all intents and purposes, I no longer existed. And maybe that was the point. They gave me a job in the prison library. Quiet work. Filing. Sorting. I read everything I could get my hands on. Textbooks, legal manuals, investment guides. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built a fortune by hiring people smarter than me. But here, with no one left to trust, I had to become them. I studied mergers, tax shelters, offshore entities, and leveraged buyouts until I could diagram entire corporate hierarchies in my sleep. I wrote letters I never sent. Hundreds. To Olivia. To her mother. To myself. Some days, I almost convinced myself she'd been manipulated. That someone else had pulled the strings. That maybe she panicked and got in too deep. But those were the nights I didn't sleep, because deep down, I knew the truth. Olivia had wanted me out of the way, and she'd succeeded. The news was harder to access, but I got what I could. I watched her climb in the ranks, speaking on tech panels, gracing magazine covers, launching Vire Labs as a cutting-edge AI incubator. She rebranded Morgan Tech like it was some dirty little secret. She called it a new era of innovation, and reporters ate it up. They praised her poise, her business acumen, her grace under fire. Once, I saw a clip of her on Bloomberg. They asked her how she managed such a meteoric rise at such a young age. She smiled, my smile, and said, "Legacy is overrated. I build for the future." I had to bite my tongue until it bled. In prison, you learn to compartmentalize. I started cataloging her every move, not out of obsession, but strategy. I needed to know how she thought, who she trusted, where the weak points were. And over time, patterns emerged. She surrounded herself with yes men, people who owed her, people who didn't remember the company before she gutted it. One name kept popping up, Elliot Chambers, an ambitious CFO with a habit of covering tracks. I remembered him, fresh out of Wharton, sharp but eager to please. He'd always worshipped Olivia. I wondered how much he knew, how far he'd go for her. I started making lists, names, timelines, events. I wasn't just gathering intel. I was building a case. Not for court. For myself. One afternoon, an old-timer named Nate sat beside me in the yard. He'd been inside nearly 20 years, but still kept his suits clean for Sunday visits. "You walk like a man who ain't ready to let go," he said, lighting a cigarette. "That'll eat you alive." I told him I didn't care, that I had no one left to let go of. He just nodded, slow and tired. "Then don't waste your second chance being small. If you're going to come back so hard they feel it in their teeth." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bunk and started sketching the blueprint. Not for revenge, for obliteration. Time passed in rituals. Reading, working out, planning. I filed for early release twice. Denied both times. On my third attempt, the warden called me into his office. "You're a smart man, Morgan," he said. "But don't think smarts erase what you did." I smiled politely. I didn't bother defending myself anymore. What would be the point? The truth had already been sold, and Olivia had cashed every check. My early release came on a rainy Tuesday, 10 years to the day of my sentencing. The guards handed me a plastic bag with my watch, my wallet, and the same suit I'd worn the day I was arrested. It didn't fit anymore. Too tight across the chest. Like the fabric was trying to choke the man I used to be. I looked in the mirror at the halfway house and didn't recognize my own face. Gray in my beard, lines carved into my forehead. But it was still me. Still Richard Morgan, just buried deeper now. I spent the next 3 months disappearing. I moved states, used aliases, scraped together money from old contacts who hadn't forgotten the man behind the scandal. Some were skeptical. Some were scared. But a few, just a few, offered quiet help. A name change here. A safe address there. One even introduced me to a surgeon who owed him a favor. "We can't make you look like Brad Pitt," the man joked, "but we can make you unfamiliar." That was enough. I went under the knife as Richard Morgan. I woke up as Daniel Shaw. The recovery was brutal. I looked like hell for weeks. But the first time I walked down a street without anyone flinching, I nearly cried. Freedom is a funny thing. You don't feel it when you have it. Only when it's gone. Or when you steal it back, piece by piece. I started investing again, small, quiet moves. Stock portfolios. Real estate trusts. I created a digital shell company, Shaw Vector Group. I kept it anonymous. Private. Controlled through layers so thick, not even the IRS could map them without a court order. And then I waited. But waiting wasn't passive. I hunted. Every mention of Vire Holdings, I read. Every quarterly report, I dissected. I knew Olivia's weak spots now. Her pride, her need to dominate every room. She'd stretched herself too thin, acquired too fast, trusted the wrong influencers. And the best part? She never saw me coming, because she thought I was dead, or at least irrelevant. And the world agreed with her. But the world was about to learn a different truth. So was she. The hardest part of starting over isn't the money. It's the anonymity. In prison, your name is all you have. Even if it's just a number to the guards, it still belongs to you. But out here, with a new face and a new identity, I was no one. A ghost. Daniel Shaw had no history, no family, no credit score. The world treats invisible men with suspicion, and banks treat them worse. I learned quickly to stop thinking like Richard Morgan. Morgan fought to build things. Shaw would build only to burn. My first goal was simple, financial camouflage. I didn't want riches. I wanted reach. Shell companies. Blind trusts. Limited partnerships managed through third-party fiduciaries. I studied how hedge funds buried losses and how family offices funneled assets offshore. I'd spent 10 years in a cage reading about power. Now, I was ready to wield it. My first real asset came from a man named Clyde. He'd been a regional director for Morgan Tech back in the 90s before Olivia downsized him in a very public boardroom sweep. He never forgot that humiliation. When I reached out using a burner number and a scrambled voice, I said 2 words. "It's me." He didn't ask how I was alive. He didn't ask why I'd vanished. He just asked what I needed. Clyde had held on to a few quiet ventures, one of which owned a 3.4% stake in a logistics firm I knew Vire Holdings had just attempted to acquire. Through Clyde's entity, I bought out the remaining shareholders. A month later, I declined Olivia's acquisition bid. Publicly, quietly. No one knew it was me, but I imagined her surprise when the deal vanished. That win gave me leverage. And leverage attracted loyalty. One of my old lieutenants, Diane, reached out through encrypted email. She'd been forced out after the rebrand, blacklisted by Olivia for being too loyal to the old regime. Her words, not mine. Diane still had friends in mid-level finance, and she'd been quietly tracking Vire's inner structure. She handed me a gold mine, a list of holding companies Olivia used to insulate her core assets, each one layered, compartmentalized, and riddled with minor errors. One LLC was registered under a dead executive's name. Another listed a P.O. box in a non-existent county. Sloppy. Reckless. Olivia's fatal flaw was thinking the empire was too big to fall. She'd never had to worry about someone understanding the bones of her business better than she did. That's when I started assembling my own board. Not a legal one. A personal circle. Trusted players. People who knew how to move money, negotiate quietly, and erase footprints. Clyde ran the back office. Diane monitored corporate chatter. A third man, Elias, a cybersecurity expert with a chip on his shoulder, handled identity shielding. They didn't know my full story, only fragments. That was by design. I didn't need sympathy. I needed results. And the moment they signed on, Shaw Vector Group became more than a shell. It became a scalpel. 3 months into our operation, we hit our first major milestone. Acquiring a controlling interest in Bellamy West, a mid-tier conglomerate with a reputation for under-the-table dealings. On paper, it was a dead company, but it had one critical asset, an 18% non-voting share in Heartgrave Capital, which owned 51% of Vire's newest division, Vire Nexus. That stake meant access, and access meant influence. I didn't even flinch when the numbers cleared. I watched the final transaction on a dusty monitor in a rented apartment above a pawn shop. No champagne. No celebration. Just the soft, affirming beep of a completed transfer. I owned a piece of her now, and she didn't even know it. That's when things started to change. The first confrontation wasn't face-to-face. It was a gala in San Diego. The Foundation for Emerging Sciences was hosting a black-tie event, and I knew Olivia would be there. She never missed a chance to be photographed holding a mic in one hand and a glass of Dom in the other. I walked in alone, in a tailored gray suit, with a salt and pepper beard and a name tag that read Daniel Shaw, Shaw Vector Group. She was radiant as always, head held high, surrounded by sycophants. I watched her for almost an hour. How she worked the room. How she turned every question into an opportunity to mention herself. She hadn't changed at all. Eventually, I accidentally bumped into her by the wine bar. "Excuse me," she said, smiling politely, then glancing at my name tag. "Shaw Vector. I've heard the name. Real estate, right?" I smiled, just enough to intrigue. "Among other things. I'm Olivia Vire," she said, extending her hand. "We might have overlapping interests." "Oh, I know who you are," I replied. Something flickered in her eyes. Not recognition, yet, but a twitch. A sliver of unease. "And how do you know me?" she asked, tone still breezy. "Hard to miss someone who built an empire from ashes," I said. "Though I imagine some of those ashes belonged to someone else." She paused. Just a second, but long enough to notice. Then she laughed, a high, rehearsed laugh. "Well, you know what they say. The best legacies start when you stop waiting for permission." I toasted her glass and walked away. She didn't follow, but I knew she was watching. Back at the apartment that night, I stood at the window and watched the city breathe. 10 years ago, I'd have done anything to sit beside her at one of those galas, to introduce her as my daughter, to see her carry the Morgan name into the next century. But that name was dead. She'd buried it, rewritten it, called it her own. And so I let her. I let her drink and laugh and pose for the cameras. Because her downfall had already begun. And the best part? She still had no idea it was me. The night after the gala, I sat alone in my apartment and replayed every second of our interaction. Her voice, her expressions. That moment her eyes narrowed, just slightly, like something inside her almost stirred. I'd waited 10 years for that flicker. It wasn't recognition. She didn't see me yet. But it was enough to tell me one thing. Olivia still feared shadows. She just didn't know which one was mine. That fear would grow, slowly at first, like rot behind a wall. And when it finally broke through the surface, I wanted it to be unmistakable. I wasn't going to haunt her. I was going to dismantle her entire world. until the only thing she had left to cling to was the knowledge that she put me in the ground and left me there. The next few weeks became a masterclass in quiet war. I kept my moves subtle, surgical. Using Bellamy West's influence inside Heartgrave Capital, we began blocking Olivia's proposed expansions. Nothing loud, just delays. Approvals that didn't come. Funding that dried up without explanation. Her name still carried weight, but the foundation beneath her was beginning to shift. I heard whispers through Diane's channels. Olivia growing more aggressive in board meetings, blaming inefficiencies, snapping at longtime executives. The cracks were there. I just had to keep pressing. One afternoon, Diane called. She sounded breathless. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "She's restructuring again. Splitting Nexus into 3 new verticals. She's desperate. She's trying to make the numbers look better for investors." I leaned back in my chair, the sunlight catching the edge of my glass. "That's not desperation," I said. "That's vanity. She's hoping if she moves fast enough, no one will notice the rot." But we noticed. And we documented everything. Every shift. Every misstep. I wasn't just planning her collapse. I was archiving it. So when the time came, the world wouldn't just see her fall. They'd see exactly how high she thought she was. It was during this phase that the past came knocking. Clyde forwarded me a news article, one of those gushing profiles in Fortune. From prisoner's daughter to CEO of the future. The piece was a celebration of Olivia's grace under legacy scandal. She told the reporter that she'd been forced to clean up after a father who couldn't adapt to modern ethics. I read that sentence 3 times, my hand trembling just slightly around the coffee mug. I'd expected spin. I'd expected deflection. But that was personal. That was a lie so venomous it made my vision blur. I thought of my first boardroom. My first deal. Teaching her how to read a contract by age 12. And now she stood on my grave and called it cleaning up. That article led to the next step. I called Elias. I want every asset Vire has tied to public contracts. Government, healthcare, education, anything with a paper trail. It took him 2 days. What he found shocked even me. Olivia had overleveraged a $90 million defense innovation grant using a holding company registered under another shell, a Delaware firm called Lindrex Solutions. On paper, it was squeaky clean. But buried in the corporate tree? Heartgrave Capital, which meant Bellamy West, which meant me. Olivia was too arrogant to check the ownership chain. She thought she was protected by lawyers and smoke. But she didn't realize the smoke was coming from inside the house. It was time for the second confrontation. This time, not by chance. There was a tech summit in Chicago, big enough to draw attention, small enough to be intimate. Olivia was headlining a panel on disruptive legacy. I got myself an invite through a fabricated sponsorship with Shaw Vector. I dressed down, navy suit, no tie, 5-day stubble. Just enough to look like a man too busy to care about appearances. I waited until her panel ended and the room emptied out. She lingered behind, laughing with 2 assistants, then turned, and there I was. "Mr. Shaw," she said, surprised. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." I smiled. "I've been following your work." "Impressive." Her eyes sharpened. "Then you know the market's not easy. Most of us are barely keeping our heads above water. Some sink faster than others." There it was, that flicker again. She tilted her head. "You have an interesting way of saying things. Where did you say you were based again?" "Nowhere permanent. I move where the money moves." She gave a tight, suspicious smile. "That's dangerous." I leaned in slightly. "Only for people standing still." We held eye contact for a moment too long. Her assistant called her name from the hallway. She didn't look away. "Maybe we should talk sometime," she said. "There's a lot of noise in this industry. Hard to know who's behind what." I nodded. "You'd be surprised." That night, I received an email from a proxy account tied to Vire's acquisitions team. They wanted to schedule a strategic conversation with Shaw Vector Group. She was testing me, trying to feel out whether I was friend or threat. But she had no idea that the man she was baiting was the same one she'd buried 10 years ago. She didn't remember my voice. She didn't recognize my eyes. But she'd remember me soon enough. Not as the man she framed, but as the one who came back to finish what she started. Chapter 5. Paper Cut's power is loud when it's working for you. But when it turns against you, It retreats into whispers, strange emails, calls that drop after one ring. That's how I knew the knives were starting to cut. Olivia, for all her bravado and PR polish, had never been hunted before. She was used to pressuring from above, executives, advisors, desperate startups begging for her signature. But she didn't understand pressure from below. It creeps. It multiplies. It waits until the foundation buckles, and suddenly the house isn't safe anymore. The first sign of slippage came through Diane. Nexus just missed payroll, she told me, her voice low and sharp. Blamed it on a banking error. But it's not. They're out of cash. I knew they would be. I'd made sure of it. Through Heartgrave Capital, I'd quietly severed their revolving credit line by triggering a compliance review on one of their subsidiaries. On the surface, it looked like a routine audit. But internally, it paralyzed their cash flow. No new acquisitions. No disbursements. No quarterly bonuses. And Olivia? She didn't even realize it was coming from her own board. The public wasn't far behind. Within 2 weeks, rumors hit the tech blogs. Is Vire over-leveraged? Whispers of a shakeup inside Nexus. I didn't plant those articles. I didn't have to. Investors are like vultures. One limp, and they circle. She went into damage control, fast. Press releases, interviews, public reassurances. But I could see it in her eyes. In the way she carried herself during those interviews. Her voice clipped. Her gaze distracted. Olivia was unraveling. And then came the board meeting. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. Heartgrave held just enough sway to call for an emergency leadership vote inside Nexus. Olivia thought it was about cost restructuring. She walked in expecting to fire a few VPs. Instead, they presented a motion, a temporary freeze on her executive power, for 90 days, to stabilize investor confidence. The vote passed 5-3. Olivia lost control of her own division, and she still didn't know who pulled the trigger. I received the recording the next morning, anonymously. She screamed, not in rage, but in disbelief. You can't do this to me. I built this. Her voice cracked in a way I'd only heard once before, when she was 15 and her mother's gravestone had just been lowered into the earth. She'd cried then, too. But back then, I held her. This time, I just listened. Quietly. Alone. I didn't enjoy it. Not like I thought I would. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like math. One loss after another. Totaling a truth she refused to accept. She hadn't built anything. She'd stolen it. And now the ledger was being balanced. But the most satisfying blow hadn't landed yet. That came 3 days later, when I called Olivia directly. She didn't recognize the number, of course. I used a routed line through a shell law firm. I waited until she picked up, breathless. "This is Olivia," she snapped. I waited half a beat. Then I said, "You look tired." There was silence on the line. Just a breath, sharp, startled. "Who is this?" "Funny thing about houses built on stolen land," I said. "They never sit quite right." "Who is this?" I ended the call. Diane warned me it was reckless. "You've done everything right. Why risk exposure now?" I didn't answer her. Because I knew why. I needed her to know it wasn't over. I needed her to feel it coming. The fallout started fast. One of her VPs leaked emails to the press. Documents showing asset transfers between her shell companies. Potential tax fraud. Olivia held a press conference to deny everything. The makeup was thick under her eyes. The smiles tighter than before. "We're undergoing a standard review," she told the cameras. Nothing unusual for a company of our size. But even the journalists seemed skeptical now. The final blow came from a source I didn't expect. An anonymous voicemail. I played it in the dark, sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of scotch. Olivia's voice filled the room. "Whoever you are, I don't know what you think I did, but you've made your point. Okay, you win. Just stop." Her voice broke on the last word. A sob caught between syllables. "I don't know who's doing this, but I swear. I didn't mean to." She stopped herself. Click. No apology. Just panic. I replayed it twice. Then I deleted it. This wasn't about remorse. This was about reckoning. She wanted someone to stop the bleeding. But there were still more cuts to make. And I wasn't done yet. There's a quiet, clinical kind of satisfaction that comes from ending something. Not rage. Not glee. Just a finality. A stillness in the air like after a building implodes. All dust, no sound. That's what I felt the morning I dissolved Vire Holdings. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even particularly difficult. Olivia had done most of the work for me, layering the company across so many fractured entities that all I had to do was own the right keys. And I did. One by one, I gathered control of her board, her capital streams, her voting rights. The final piece came through a majority acquisition of Hartgrave's senior leadership. When they sided with me, the rest fell like dominoes. I sent the order to initiate dissolution at 7:43 a.m. By 8:12, the entire structure that Olivia had built, on my grave, was legally and irreversibly crumbling. The first headlines hit before noon. Vire Holdings disbands in sudden corporate shakeup. CEO Olivia Vire silent as empire collapses. I didn't watch the coverage. I didn't need to. I sat in the same creaky chair I'd used since the beginning, Daniel Shaw's chair, in Daniel Shaw's modest apartment, and I stared out the window at the traffic below. Horns, buses, life as usual. I thought it would feel like triumph, but it didn't. It felt like balance, like exhaling after holding your breath for 10 years. Then came the fallout. Olivia's assets, properties, partnerships, patents, were liquidated by the court to satisfy debts and contractual obligations. Investors fled. Partners distanced themselves publicly, claiming ignorance. Her legal team scrambled to delay filings, but it was useless. Every delay cost her more. Her social media accounts went dark. The podcasts she used to guest on suddenly erased her episodes. She became radioactive, untouchable. The tech world moved fast, and once it turned on you, there was no grace period. 1 week, she was a visionary. The next, she was a liability. And no one protects liabilities. Diane called me 3 days later, voice low and hesitant. She's done, she said. She tried to call a private investor summit. No one showed. Even Chambers is gone. She's completely isolated. I didn't respond, just stared at the old photo on my desk. Me, Olivia, and her mother on the beach, years before all this. Before ambition curdled into betrayal. Before my daughter became my executioner. I didn't feel joy. I felt the ache of absence. Of all the years we'd never get back. But I didn't regret it. Because some debts don't get settled with time. Some require exact measures. And this was hers. The only person who didn't go silent was Olivia herself. She showed up at my building. Not at my apartment. She didn't know it was me yet. But she came to Shaw Vector's registered office, demanding to speak to the CEO. My assistant texted me, unsure. I told her to let Olivia sit. I watched from the surveillance feed. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in energy, in presence. No entourage, no security. Just her, a designer bag, and a face too composed for someone who'd just lost everything. I didn't go down. I let her wait. 2 hours. Then I had the front desk escort her out. No words exchanged. That night, she left another voicemail. This one was different. I know it's you, she said. I don't know how. But I know. Silence. I don't know what you want. You already took everything. Another pause. You're right. I took your name. Your company. I took it because I thought it was mine. You never saw me. You just groomed me to become you. And I hated it. Her breath shook. I hated watching you work yourself to death for strangers. I hated that you never saw me as anything but your replacement. I hated how you made me feel like I owed you everything I ever became. Silence again. I'm sorry. Click. The voicemail sat there all night. I didn't delete it. I didn't save it, either. I just let it exist, somewhere between the past and whatever this was. But I knew what it meant. She still didn't understand. She thought this was about validation, about legacy. But it wasn't. It was about consequence. She didn't just take what was mine. She killed a part of me. And now I'd return the favor. I could have destroyed her further, pursued criminal charges for financial fraud, alerted federal regulators, made her name synonymous with scandal. But I didn't. Because sometimes survival is the harsher punishment. Now, every door she tries to open will remind her who closed it. Every investor who hangs up on her will echo my silence. And every time she says her new name, Vire, it will taste like ash. The morning after the voicemail, a package arrived at my door. No return address. Inside, a silver frame with a photo of the three of us on that same beach. Olivia had been 6. She was holding a seashell, grinning. Her mother had one arm around her and the other around me. On the back was a sticky note with 2 words. For what it's worth. I stared at it for a long time. Then I set it down and walked away. It took me 3 days to decide whether to see her. I told myself this whole plan was about closure, not confrontation. That I didn't need to look her in the eyes. But something shifted after that photo arrived. The gall of it. The calculated nostalgia. Like a bandage dropped on an open wound. I hadn't seen Olivia face to face since the trial. Since she stood there and told a jury that I was unstable, negligent, corrupt. And now, a decade later, she sent a picture of us smiling on a beach, as if that erased anything. It didn't spark forgiveness. It sparked curiosity. What does a person look like after they've lost everything they stole? What remains of them? So, I made the call. Clyde arranged for temporary access to the old Vire Holdings building. Now being liquidated and emptied, floor by floor. No press. No staff. Just a quiet skeleton of what used to be. I arrived just after noon. The lobby was cold and echoing, stripped of its sleek branding. No more holograms. No framed quotes about vision or leadership. Just pale walls and a flickering overhead light. I waited by the glass doors of the executive suite, staring at the name etched into the wall, Olivia Vire, CEO. It was faded now, like the gold had peeled off. Poetic, really. She was late. She always had been, especially when control started slipping. And when she finally stepped off the elevator, I almost didn't recognize her. Her heels echoed like gunshots on the tile. Olivia looked thinner, tired in a way makeup couldn't fix, but still poised, still polished. She wore all black, practical, severe, like armor. We locked eyes. For a moment, there was nothing. No greeting. No flicker of old affection. Just a long, deliberate stare. And then she spoke. "I figured it out after Chicago," she said. "Something in your voice. The phrasing. You said something Dad would have said." I nodded once. "You never forgot my voice. You just chose not to recognize it." She stepped closer, eyes sharp. "You spent 10 years building this. Just to burn down what I made." "What you made?" I said, almost laughing. "You forged documents. Lied under oath. Watched me rot in prison while you renamed the company I built from scratch. That wasn't building. That was theft." "I had no choice," she snapped. "You were going to push me out. You never saw me as a leader. Just a placeholder until you died or collapsed at your desk." "That's not true," I said, voice low. "I was grooming you to take over. But I wanted you to earn it. You wanted it handed to you." She didn't flinch. "You think this made us even?" she asked. "You destroyed my reputation. My future." I stepped closer, close enough to see the fine cracks in her foundation. The panic barely veiled by her mascara. "I gave you what you gave me. Silence. Isolation. A legacy rewritten." She clenched her jaw, her hands tight at her sides. "You don't understand what it was like, living in your shadow. Even when you weren't trying, you made me feel like I'd never measure up. I was tired of being your project. And I was tired of being your target," I said. "But I didn't turn you into one. You did that yourself." She stared at the floor, then back at me. Something flickered behind her eyes. Regret? Maybe. But not enough. Never enough. "I didn't know it would be this bad," she whispered. I tilted my head. "You didn't know what it was like to lose everything. Now you do." For a second, the room went still. No footsteps. No voices. Just us. 2 people with the same blood, the same ambition, the same ruin between them. "I miss her," she said quietly. "Mom." It was the only true thing she'd said since walking in. "So do I," I replied. There was no embrace. No softening. Just that small moment. A fragile, flickering olive branch. And then it was gone. She stepped back, her spine straightening. "So what now? Are you going to keep watching me? Make sure I stay down." I shook my head. "No. You're free now. To fail or rebuild. I won't stop you. But I won't help you either." She didn't argue. She just nodded. Once. Then turned and walked away. The sound of her footsteps fading down the hallway felt like an epilogue I hadn't known I needed. When the elevator doors closed behind her, I stood there alone for a long time, staring at that tarnished name on the wall. I didn't feel relief. Or victory. Just finished. She had her chance to make it right. And she didn't. It took me 3 days to decide whether to see her. I told myself this whole plan was about closure, not confrontation, that I didn't need to look her in the eyes. But something shifted after that photo arrived. The gall of it, the calculated nostalgia, like a bandage dropped on an open wound. I hadn't seen Olivia face to face since the trial, since she stood there and told a jury that I was unstable, negligent, corrupt. And now, a decade later, she sent a picture of us smiling on a beach, as if that erased anything. It didn't spark forgiveness. It sparked curiosity. What does a person look like after they've lost everything they stole? What remains of them? So, I made the call. Clyde arranged for temporary access to the old Vire Holdings building, now being liquidated and emptied, floor by floor. No press, no staff, just a quiet skeleton of what used to be. I arrived just after noon. The lobby was cold and echoing, stripped of its sleek branding. No more holograms. No framed quotes about vision or leadership. Just pale walls and a flickering overhead light. I waited by the glass doors of the executive suite, staring at the name etched into the wall, Olivia Vire, CEO. It was faded now, like the gold had peeled off. Poetic, really. She was late. She always had been, especially when control started slipping. And when she finally stepped off the elevator, I almost didn't recognize her. Her heels echoed like gunshots on the tile. Olivia looked thinner, tired in a way makeup couldn't fix, but still poised, still polished. She wore all black, practical, severe, like armor. We locked eyes. For a moment, there was nothing. No greeting. No flicker of old affection. Just a long, deliberate stare. And then she spoke. "I figured it out after Chicago," she said. "Something in your voice. The phrasing. You said something Dad would have said." I nodded once. "You never forgot my voice. You just chose not to recognize it." She stepped closer, eyes sharp. "You spent 10 years building this, just to burn down what I made." "What you made?" I said, almost laughing. "You forged documents. Lied under oath. Watched me rot in prison while you renamed the company I built from scratch. That wasn't building. That was theft. I had no choice," she snapped. "You were going to push me out. You never saw me as a leader. Just a placeholder until you died or collapsed at your desk." "That's not true," I said, voice low. "I was grooming you to take over. But I wanted you to earn it. You wanted it handed to you." She didn't flinch. "You think this made us even?" she asked. "You destroyed my reputation. My future." I stepped closer, close enough to see the fine cracks in her foundation. The panic barely veiled by her mascara. "I gave you what you gave me. Silence. Isolation. A legacy rewritten." She clenched her jaw, her hands tight at her sides. "You don't understand what it was like, living in your shadow. Even when you weren't trying, you made me feel like I'd never measure up. I was tired of being your project. And I was tired of being your target," I said. "But I didn't turn you into one. You did that yourself." She stared at the floor, then back at me. Something flickered behind her eyes. Regret? Maybe. But not enough. Never enough. "I didn't know it would be this bad," she whispered. I tilted my head. "You didn't know what it was like to lose everything. Now you do." For a second, the room went still. No footsteps. No voices. Just us. Two people with the same blood, the same ambition, the same ruin between them. "I miss her," she said quietly. "Mom." It was the only true thing she'd said since walking in. "So do I," I replied. There was no embrace. No softening. Just that small moment. A fragile, flickering olive branch. And then it was gone. She stepped back, her spine straightening. "So what now? Are you going to keep watching me? Make sure I stay down." I shook my head. "No. You're free now. To fail or rebuild. I won't stop you. But I won't help you either." She didn't argue. She just nodded. Once. Then turned and walked away. The sound of her footsteps fading down the hallway felt like an epilogue I hadn't known I needed. When the elevator doors closed behind her, I stood there alone for a long time, staring at that tarnished name on the wall. I didn't feel relief. Or victory. Just finished. She had her chance to make it right. And she didn't. I didn't expect peace. Peace was never part of the equation. But what I did find, after everything, was something quieter. Something like settling. Like the dust after an explosion. It doesn't repair what was broken, but it covers the wreckage long enough for you to breathe again. That was me now. Breathing. Not deeply, not easily, but breathing nonetheless. I kept the apartment. Not because I liked it. Because it was real. Modest. Anonymous. No sweeping views or brushed steel kitchen counters. Just a mattress, a desk, a fridge that made too much noise when it cycled on. It grounded me. Made the life I'd reclaimed feel earned. Like I didn't just escape the fire. I walked back through it, dragging my name out from the ashes. The world didn't know Richard Morgan was alive. As far as they were concerned, he died a white-collar criminal, and Olivia Vire had been the phoenix who rose from his mistakes. That version of the story was dead now, burned with Vire Holdings, buried under the ruins of shell companies and bad debt. But I didn't want to revive my old name. I wasn't looking for redemption. The truth was, I didn't need the world to believe in me. I just needed her to stop pretending she'd built it all on her own. And now, she couldn't pretend anymore. Diane called once a week now. We never talked about Olivia. Only logistics. Company matters. She'd taken over day-to-day operations of what remained of Shaw Vector. We weren't building anything new. We were cleaning up, selling off pieces, letting the whole machine wind down slowly, until one day it would vanish altogether. Like a ghost company. Fitting. I didn't want to run an empire anymore. I didn't need the pressure, the noise, the endless cycle of risk and return. I wanted silence. And after a lifetime of fighting to be heard, that silence felt almost holy. Then one day a letter came. Handwritten. No stamp. Just slid under my door. It was from Olivia. The paper was thick. Expensive. The handwriting shaky, but familiar. I stared at it for almost an hour before opening it. I don't know who I am without the empire. I don't know who I was before it. But I know who you were. And I'm sorry I tried to erase that. That was it. No signature. No plea for forgiveness. Just that quiet confession, scrawled in black ink. It didn't ask for anything. And maybe that's why I didn't throw it away. I didn't respond either. Some things don't need answers. Some wounds just need air. I sat on the balcony that evening, watching traffic blur past, and thought about all the years I'd lost. Not just in prison. Before that, too. Chasing deals. Expanding markets. Thinking that legacy was something you left in buildings and trademarks. It wasn't. It was in people. In the relationships you either protect or destroy. I had protected the wrong things. And in doing so, I'd helped create a daughter who believed empires were built on blood. She wasn't born ruthless. I taught her how to win. And she learned too well. But I wasn't her father anymore. Not in the way I once was. And I didn't want to be. Olivia would rebuild, or she wouldn't. But it wouldn't be with my help. That part of the story was over. I stood and walked back inside. The picture frame, the one she sent, still sat on my shelf. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't touched it. But I hadn't thrown it away either. Some ghosts, you don't exorcise. You just live beside them. Quietly. Honestly. Without illusion. The next morning, I closed the final Shaw Vector account. Just like that, the company vanished. No press release, no headlines. Just silence. The kind I'd earned. I wasn't rebuilding. I wasn't relaunching. I was retiring. From vengeance. From business. From names I no longer needed. Because in the end, all I ever wanted was for her to feel it. To understand what she did. And now she did. And that was enough. If you felt that quiet burn of betrayal and redemption in this story, then take a moment. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Was the father justified? Did the daughter ever truly understand what she lost? Your voice matters here, just as much as his did. Help us grow this community of powerful, raw, and unforgettable family stories by engaging and sharing what hit home for you. See you soon in the next story.